Okay, well, my name is Dennis McKenna. Many people know who I am. I'm a psychedelic researcher. I'm a member of the Heffter Research Institute, and I've researched ayahuasca for many years, and also I consider it a personal path as well. So that's one way to introduce me, I guess. Sorry. Okay.
No, it's totally fine, especially when we're talking about, important things like psychedelics. There's definitely personal experience that comes into it.
Right.
I'm particularly interested in psilocybin mushrooms.
Okay.
We hear a lot about them. What has your kind of experiences been with them? What kind of effects do you see with them, and what kind of abilities have you seen been capable with mushrooms?
Well, I think, in the context of the Heffter Research Institute, in the same way that MAPS has kind of adopted MDMA and is trying to push that through to clinical trials, Heffter has really focused on the psilocybin mushroom. And psilocybin turns out to be the perfect clinical psychedelic in a certain way. It's non-toxic. In most cases, people have more or less pleasant experiences, and it covers a spectrum of therapeutic applications, everything from anxiety and in the dying to smoking cessation to intractable depression, potentially for addictions. We certainly know it's spectacular when it comes to smoking cessation. There are some studies out of Johns Hopkins that show that psilocybin basically blows away everything else when it comes to stopping smoking. Interesting studies, intractable smokers, 3-pack-a-day people for years and years and years. After 1 or 2 fairly high-dose psilocybin sessions, 89% are tobacco-free 6 months later. There is no other treatment that even comes close. So the question with all these psychedelics is, where is a clearly defined therapeutic application that will get them accepted into mainstream medicine? And I see 2 routes for that. One is the addiction thing, the smoking thing. Interestingly, after that study was done, they applied to NIDA, the National Institute on Drug Abuse, for further funding. Obviously, smoking, tobacco addiction is a huge health problem, so they figured with these results they could approach NIDA for some additional funding to do a larger study. NIDA's approach was, we're not funding psilocybin study, not now or not ever, so just forget it. So this is unfortunate because this is, for one thing, a clue to sort of the bureaucratic mindset. Here is something that clearly works, it's safe, it's effective. Why aren't they funding it? Simply because of the stigma of the 60s? Or what rationale do they have for that? Because the studies that Heffter largely has funded, Johns Hopkins, New York U, and so on, shows that in a proper clinical setting, in a well-controlled setting, it's quite safe and it's quite effective. And then the other path that I think you're going to find psilocybin come into mainstream medicine is through the hospice, essentially through the hospice route, because it's been shown to be very effective in helping people who are faced with death, overcome that anxiety. And once it's approved, I think you're going to see a change in the way it's used in that respect. Ideally, I would like to see, ultimately, I'd like there to be centers where people could go if they're in a terminal state, so that not only they could have the experience, but they could have the experience with their families if they were willing. And that would be a huge thing, I think. So that's where I'd like to see it go.
Just one last question. It's very interesting you brought up the smoking thing. I've been a heavy smoker for 10 years, and it's disgusting, and it's something that I feel ashamed of even doing.
Right.
Mushrooms have helped me with that.
They
they absolutely helped me with that. And what I wanted to talk to you about is there's of course this stigma. People are like, you're druggy, you're a dirty hippie, you're an abuser. There's a lot of social conditioning and propaganda against psychedelics, against particularly mushrooms, and there's also the state, which is against it and puts people in jail for having these kind of experiences and using these psychedelics for healing purposes and for addiction purposes. I'm telling you, it helped me out tremendously. How do we get over that? What's the next step? You've been in this for so long. Just fix it. Dennis, fix it.
Easy. The answer is education. The answer is good science and good dissemination of the information. I mean, in this time, you see so many more positive reports about psychedelics and their healing properties. So it's a slow process, but the social consciousness is shifting. And it used to be that if you talked about psychedelics, they were either ridiculed or they were condemned. They were, the message was either these things will make you crazy, they're terrible, or the whole thing is a joke and you're just a bunch of hippies, Well, we're not hippies anymore, and I think it's just a matter of how you propagate the message to the public. Yeah. The public respects science, for whatever reason. That is kind of the new authority of our age for some people. So if you say, well, it can help with depression, it can help with addiction, it can help with existential anxiety in the terminal, then lead people to the right information. And if they have an open mind, then, they'll be receptive to it. There are always going to be people who like to hurl invective, and just say, well, you're just a bunch of dirty hippie druggies, whatever. Well, you can't really convince those people. I mean, those people demonstrate by their own ignorance that they're just stupid. It's the my mind is made up, don't confuse me with facts camp of people. Okay, if you don't want to be convinced, or if you want to have your beliefs, your delusions, it's not up to us. They will have them whether we try to convince them or not. It's the more thoughtful people that we want to, that we want to appeal to, and we also want to. More and more, there are more thoughtful people because either themselves they felt like they benefited, or they know people who have benefited. So there's nothing like, nothing like proof, nothing like evidence to convince people. So that's how we solve that problem. Slowly over time.
Over time, and have to deal with the censors and just the naysayers, and also just the social conditioning that has ingrained into people's minds. You do any of these stuff, you should be outcasted. You're denigrating society, being worse for society.
It's not as bad now as it used to be. Yeah. I mean, it is slowly changing. So that's the thing. You can't speed it up. I mean, it's just going to have to. And a lot of people are going to have to, the sort of dinosaur faction here are just going to have to die off. And then, I don't think you see these attitudes very prevalent in younger people. They get it because they've grown up with psychedelics. They've grown up in a psychedelic society. The problem is that, one of the origins of this was that when LSD came into our society, there was no social context for it, no cultural context. It dropped like a bomb into society. People were not aware of the indigenous traditions and so on, and they didn't really. So it was very disruptive to society, and it was very useful to the powers that be to use that as a way to scare everybody, and sow division and discord. We've had 40 years now to learn how to use psychedelics and to learn what psychedelics are and what they can do. So we have a much more educated generation, and I think that's a big thing. We've acknowledged the traditions, the indigenous traditions, and we can learn from those people. I mean, they've been doing this for thousands of years. If you want to know how to use psychedelics, look to those traditions, and so it's a process, but I'm encouraged, and and as a biologist, I look at it actually as an evolutionary process or co-evolutionary process. I mean, you have to be struck by the way that ayahuasca has more or less taken over the world in the last 20 years. I mean, when I was doing my graduate work in the Amazon in 1981, nobody was interested in ayahuasca. There was no ayahuasca tourism. It was a bunch of screwball anthropologists and botanists, you know. They were into it. Well, look where we are now.
Yep.
You know, it's everywhere in the world. And I am told that in New York City on any given Friday night, there are 120 at least ayahuasca sessions going on. Well, what is that about?
Yeah.
You know, and not all of them are good and not all of them are well run and so on, but I think there's a larger trend going on. I actually believe, I mean, it's not a scientific view, it kind of sounds like a, you know, screwball view, but I really think that these plants have a certain intelligence, and I think that they are reaching out to the human species. You know, all these chemistries that the plants evolve, these are messenger molecules. This is how plants react to manage their relationship with everything in their environment. They don't behave in the way we do because they're stuck in one place. Chemistry is the language of plants. Some of that chemistry happens to speak to the human brain. You know, they're neurotransmitter-like compounds with, you know, a message. And I think the message is largely, wake up, you monkeys, because you're screwing up this world, and you need to wake up and realize that, you know, you're not part of nature. You are part of nature rather than a part from nature. You don't own it. It's not here for you to dominate. It's not here for you to rape and destroy. It's here for you to nurture, if anything. And that's a lesson, I think, that a lot of people come away with from these profound psychedelic experiences with mushrooms and ayahuasca especially.
Yeah. And it's just fascinating because there's so many different theories out there, whether it comes to evolution or religion. There's always some kind of different mushroom theories. There's also been just fascinating experiments with fungi, even reproducing the Japanese subway system more effectively than it is now. There's so many different things that we could even talk about or get into, but this is only just the beginning of it. I think you laid out the foundations very well, Dennis. I always appreciate your work. I always find it fascinating. Just like psychedelics, just like anything. It's about being wise and it's about being responsible. Even with cryptocurrencies and the internet, it's used for good and it's used for bad. It's all about you being smart, doing your own research, doing your own homework. Dennis, I wanted to give you the last word and where people could find more information about you.
Well, all kinds of places. You know, I think you did make an interesting point. Very often in the discussion about drugs and in the discussion about anything like that, you know, the moral quality is projected onto the thing. I mean, these are just technologies. The moral quality emerges out of the human heart. You know, you can use psychedelics in a good way or a bad way. You can use cryptocurrency in a good way or a bad way. You can use this camera. You know, these things are morally neutral. It depends on how you deploy them, how you use them. It's the decisions you make, you know, coming out of an ethical compass or whatever. So I'll stop preaching now. Number of places you can find out. I would say Heffter is, you want to know about the psilocybin work, then heffter.org, Heffter. Everybody knows about MAPS. I don't have to plug them. They do a very good job of plugging themselves. Heffter, not so good. If you want an online resource about drugs of all sorts, every conceivable psychoactive drug you could imagine, as you know, arrowhead.org. Good people, they're putting out real information, and not just on psychedelics, just on every kind of psychoactive drug there is. So if you're going to experiment with these things, any of them, that's a good place to go for a crash course. You know, just to review it, especially there are so many designer drugs and all that out. They try and keep up with this. You know, it's almost impossible, but they do their best. And when it comes to mushrooms or ayahuasca or some of the classic ones, then, you know, they have very large vaults. They call them vaults of information, lots of good information.
Beautiful. Dennis, thank you so much. The link to your website will be in the description below. And don't worry, you are not on drugs. The lights have been coming on and off. We started when the sun was going down. I apologize. You probably can't see me anymore. I love you guys. Thank you guys so much again for watching and participating in Real Independent Media. Share this video if you found it important. And of course, I love you. Thank you again so much for watching. Stay tuned for more.
All right.
Beautiful.